Hey guys, welcome to this video on 7.6, squares, square roots, cubes, and cube roots. To get started, think about what you already know about squares and square roots. What are some things you already know about that? Some of you might already know that when you have something, a number or a variable, raised to the power of 2, instead of saying 3 to the power of 2, you can also say 3 squared. So squared is just another word or another name for something that is raised to the power of 2. And of course, in this chapter on exponents, you've learned that that means that you are multiplying 3 by itself 2 times. So 3 squared is 3 times 3. My first question for you is, where did that nickname square come from? How did mathematicians decide that if you were going to raise something to the power of 2, we were going to call it a square? Does anyone know where that nickname came from? Go ahead and think about it for a minute. How did they get the name square? They got the name square because in an actual square, if you have the measurement of one of the sides of the square, let's say that this side is equal to 5, we know that in a square all the sides are the same. And if you want to find the area of the square, how do you do that? You multiply 5 times 5 to get the area of the square. So 5 times 5 is equal to 25, and 5 squared is equal to 25. So 25 is the square of 5. And the name came from this idea right here, this concept, that if you have the two sides of a square and you multiply them together, that gives you the area. So that's where the name square came from. Square root is then the opposite thing. Just like addition and subtraction are opposites, multiplication and division are opposites, square and square roots are also opposites. So you could say that 5 is the square root of 25, just like how 25 is the square of 5. If someone asked you to prove why 5 was the square root of 25, you could prove it by saying, well, it's because 5 times 5 is equal to 25. That's why 5 is the square root. Question for you. Is there another number that's also the square root of 25? Is there another number that's also the square root of 25? There is. The other number is -5. -5 times -5 is also equal to +25, because a negative times a negative is equal to a positive. So the number 25 actually has two different square roots. +5 and -5 are both square roots of 25. Let's take a look at another number. Let's take a look at the number -36. What is the square root of -36? Trick question. There is no square root, because if I try to say that the square root of -36 is -6, watch what happens. -6 times -6 equals what number? +36, because negative times negative is positive. Well, what if I try +6? Well, that's still equal to +36. So -36 does not have any regular number that you guys are using right now, square root. It actually has an imaginary square root. I think we talked about that a little bit at the beginning of the year just for fun, but we're not going to use imaginary numbers. So as far as real numbers go, -36 does not have a real square root. So only positive numbers like +25 or +36 or +49, those will have square roots. And all the positive numbers actually have two different square roots. One square root of 49 is 7 because 7 times 7 is 49. Another option is negative 7 because negative 7 times negative 7 is also 49. In the first couple problems that we do together, I'm going to ask you to find the square root of some of these different numbers, and you're going to get two different answers. Here's the first few problems for us to do together. We already did the first one. The square root of 25 is equal to 5 or negative 5 because 5 times 5 is 25. Negative 5 times negative 5 is also 25. So those are my two answers. The square root of 64 is 8 or negative 8. And the square root of 100 is 10 or negative 10. Now these ones we could all do in our head, but sometimes you might have a problem that you can't do in your head and you need to use a calculator for. So we're going to do a couple problems where you will need to know how to do square root on your calculator. Alright, so when we're trying these problems on our calculator, we have to look for a button that looks like this, that has a square root symbol. Every calculator is different, so it's hard to say where that button will be located, but that's the button that you're looking for. So it looks like a square root sign. So go ahead and grab your calculator right now. You will need it for the entire lesson and for the rest of this chapter, so you can pause the video if you need to. Make sure that you have a calculator with you. So in your calculator, type in the square root symbol and then type in 169 equals, and it should give you 13. But remember, even though your calculator gives you 13, there's another answer. The other answer is negative 13, because negative 13 times negative 13 will also equal positive 169. Go ahead and try this next one. You can pause the video and you can try square root of 200 in your calculator. You should get the answer 14 point, and let's round it to 1, 14.1. And then remember, this can also be negative 14.1. This is approximate, we're just rounding it, because 14.1 times 14.1 is equal to 200. If you're not sure where the button is on your calculator, go ahead and pause the video and you can ask Miss Mercer on Microsoft Teams to help you find the button on your calculator. Alright, so we talked about squares and square roots. Now we're going to talk about cubes and cube roots. What do you already know about cubes and cube roots? You may already know that if you have a number or a variable raised to the power of 3, you can also say x cubed instead of x to the power of 3. So that's just another synonym here. Why do we call it cubed? It's kind of similar to the reason that we called it a square before. If you have an actual cube, which is basically like a three-dimensional square, so if you have an actual cube, if I know the length of one side of the cube, let's say that this is 4 here, that means that because it's a cube, every single side has to be 4. This has to be 4, this has to be 4, this has to be 4, everything has to be 4. And in order to find the volume of the cube, the volume is the total amount of space that is inside of the cube. So all of this inside here, that's the volume of the cube. In order to find the volume, you multiply one of the sides times the other side, and that's going to give you what this side is here, the area, and then you multiply that by this side here. So you're multiplying 4 times 4 times 4 to get the volume of the cube. So 4 times 4 is 16, times 4 again is 64. So the volume of this cube is going to be 4 to the power of 3, or 4 cubed, which is equal to 64. So that's where it gets its name from. Cube gets its name from a real-life cube, and how to find the volume of a real-life cube is to multiply a number by itself 3 times. So that's what a cube is. A cube root is similar to a square root. So 4 would be the cube root of 64 because 4 times 4 times 4 is 64. So a cube root is a number that you can multiply by itself 3 times in order to get another number. Let's do some example problems. We're definitely going to need calculators for these problems, and there should be a cube root button on your calculator. I don't know exactly what your calculator looks like or which brand you're using, but it is going to be important for you to find a button that looks like this. Some calculators will have a cube root button that already has a 3 there. Other calculators, you might need to kind of push something else before the square root sign to turn it into a cube root. But we're trying to figure out right now on your calculator, how do you take the cube root of a number? See if you can look at your calculator and figure out how to do that. Once you think you have a pretty good guess about how to do that, type this in and see if you get the right answer. So we're typing in the cube root of 343. If you typed that in correctly, you should get 7. You can test it by doing 7 times 7 times 7 in your calculator. 7 times 7 is 49, and 49 times 7 is 343. If you were not able to get 7, pause the video right now, go to Microsoft Teams, and ask Miss Mercer to video call with you so that she can help you find on your calculator how to take the cube root of a number. If you were able to get 7, that's great. You know how to do the cube root. So now let's try the next problem. We want to do the cube root of 1/27. But we don't want to get a decimal answer, and sometimes if you do this in a calculator, you will get a decimal answer. I'm going to do this one in my head. Watch how I do it in my head. I think to myself, I know that the cube root has to be a number times a number times a number, that you multiply all 3 of those numbers together, and it has to give me 1/27. I know that when you multiply fractions, you multiply the numerators together and you multiply the denominators together. I know that 1 times 1 times 1 is 1, so that part is easy. What times what is 27? Well, I know 27 is 9 times 3. Oh, and 9 is 3 times 3. So does 3 times 3 times 3 equal 27? It does. So the cube root of 1/27 should be 1/3, because if we were going to check our answer, 1/3 times 1/3 times 1/3 would equal 1/27. There's a chart that I'm going to show you right now that has a few of the basic cubes and cube roots shown in the chart. This chart right here will show you that 2 is the cube root of 8, and 27 is equal to 3 cubed. This will also show you 4 cubed and 5 cubed and 6 cubed, all the way up till 10. We will sometimes use numbers that are larger than these, but these are kind of the basic cubes. Just in case you're curious, these numbers down here are called perfect cubes. A perfect cube means that it is a whole number that if you take the cube root of it, it will give you a whole number. For example, the cube root of 216 is equal to 6, a whole number. Like the example problem that we did before, though, it doesn't always work out that way. If you try to take the cube root of 200, you're not going to get a whole number. I think we actually did the square root of 200 before, but if you type in the cube root of 200 on your calculator, you get 5.8. So it doesn't always give you whole numbers when you do cube root and square root, but if it does give you a whole number, the number you've selected is a perfect cube. I'm going to ask you guys to try 2 problems on your own. Go ahead and put these 2 problems into your calculator, see if you can figure out what the cube root of both of these numbers are here, and then you can check your answer. All right, and these are the 2 answers. For the top one, I wanted it to be a fraction, so in my calculator, I actually just typed in the cube root of 729, and I got that that was equal to 9. which means that I know my final answer is going to be 1 over 9. And then for the second one, I typed in cube root of 512, and that equals 8. That means that 8 times 8 times 8 is equal to 512. All right, we have one last thing for today. Here it is. The last thing that we're going to be doing today is solving equations involving roots, involving cube roots and square roots. This first problem says solve x squared equals 4.41. To do that, you're trying to find a number that will work for x to make the equation true. To find that number, I have to do the opposite operation on both sides. If I were solving something like 3x is equal to 12, to find out what x is, I would say, well, multiplication is happening right here, so I have to do the opposite, which means I would have to divide both sides by 3 to get that x is equal to 4. Just like how you solve equations like that, we're going to solve this equation the same way by doing the opposite operation to both sides. So if x is being squared over here, we're going to take the square root of both sides. The square root of x squared, that's going to be x. And then the square root of 4.41, that's what we type into our calculator. And when you do that, you should get 2.1. That means that 2.1 times 2.1 is equal to 4.41. Remember, it could also be negative 2.1 because negative 2.1 times negative 2.1 is also equal to 4.41. All right, let's take a look at this next problem. X cubed is equal to 1,000. So we're looking for a number that if you multiply it by itself 3 times, it will equal 1,000. You may be able to do this in your head, but just for good measure, let's go ahead and do this the long way. We're going to take the cube root of both sides. The cube root of x cubed is equal to x, and then we can take the cube root of 1,000 in our calculator, and we're going to get 10. 10 times 10 is 100, and 100 times 10 is 1,000. So x is equal to 10. Now, could x equal negative 10? It's a very interesting question. Could x equal negative 10? Let's try it. If we had negative 10, and we're doing a cube now, so we have to do it 3 times. Negative 10 times negative 10 times negative 10. Let's see, negative times negative is positive. So now we have 100 times negative 10, which is negative 1,000. That's not what we want. We wanted it to be positive 1,000. So in this case, could x be negative 10? The answer is no, it cannot be negative 10. The only time that you have a positive and a negative is when you have square. If you have cube, it actually can't be positive and negative in your answer. When you're finding the cube root of something, if the number that you're finding the cube root of, like in this case 1,000, is positive, your answer is going to be positive. If you are, for example, trying to find the cube root of negative 27, you're looking for a number that when you multiply it by itself 3 times would equal negative 27. In that case, the only possible answer is negative 3, because negative 3 times negative 3 is 9, and 9 times negative 3 is negative 27. So for cube root, it's a little different. For cube root, anytime the number is positive, the answer is positive. Anytime the number is negative, the answer is negative. But remember, for square root, you can still have 2 different answers. For square root, you can only take the square root of positive numbers, for now, and then your answers that you get, you're going to have 1 positive and 1 negative answer. All right, you are almost done for today. I only have 2 more problems for you to do, and that's it. Here they are. Go ahead and you guys can pause the video, try these last 2 problems, and then you can check your answer. All right, here are the 2 answers. For the first one, x squared is equal to 2.25. So in your calculator, you type in square root of 2.25 and you should get 1.5 but remember that could also be a negative 1.5. And for the next one, since x cubed is equal to 1/8, in your calculator you type in the cube root of 1/8, but actually what I do is I type in the cube root of 8, and when my calculator gives me 2, I know that the answer should actually be 1/2 or 1/2. So that's it for this video. Congratulations. Good job, guys, on your work for today. Go ahead and take the notes that you wrote, take a picture of those, submit that picture to Canvas, and then you're officially done with this video. Yay!